everyone, this is David Pike, the Motorcity Mechanic. In today's video, we're back on the PT Cruiser trying to find out why it doesn't start. And the system that we're going to be diagnosing is the fuel system. In the last video, I asked all of you to leave a comment below about what you think the next thing is that we need to check based off of what we've checked already. And of course, the overwhelming #1 response was fuel. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be diving into all things fuel related to this PT Cruiser. But before we start that, I want to touch on a few things that showed up in the comments on the last video. And that's where a lot of people are asking, why am I checking this, not checking that, and why is it taking me so long? I think you're grabbing onto the wrong aspect of what these videos are about. It's about teaching, it's about learning, it's about showing things. Yes, as a flat rate mechanic, I know that I can jump on this and hopefully in less than an hour figure out what's going on. But if I was to do that, you'd miss out a lot. You wouldn't be able to see everything. You wouldn't be able to test the different systems like ignition, compression, fuel. I wouldn't be able to show you everything. So yes, I'm taking longer than normal, but there is a method to my madness. I'm trying to share some knowledge with you. Yes, there are some seasoned professionals out there that know more than me. I get that. There's also the average DIYer who doesn't know how to do these things. So these videos have to cover all aspects of the different types of people watching it. So this isn't the type of video you're into, because I haven't jumped right into the conclusion, then I apologize. You might want to find a different channel. But hopefully all those tuning in are wanting to learn something, and that's exactly what I'm doing this for. Now in the meantime, we've got some housekeeping. We did have the plugs out previously, so we're going to dive into reinstalling everything, so that way we can dive straight into the fuel system. Now in the last video, we removed the plugs and found out that they were carbon fouled. At that point, we did a wet and dry compression test. So this would be the perfect time to go ahead and reinstall a new set. So if the plugs are installed, I want to go ahead and install the upper intake again. Now remember, we only got a few bolts at the front, one at the rear, some hoses, vacuum lines, and a cable. 10 minutes tops. Not really an inconvenience. It's just that I want to check something else with the intake back on, so I don't mind taking it off and on if I need to. One thing I do got to remember is these rags right here need to come out. And now we're ready for the next step. Now in the last video, a lot of you left comments about trying to use starter fluid. Now starter fluid is one of those controversial things. You can ask 5 different mechanics their opinion on why they use it or why they wouldn't use it, and you're going to get 5 different answers. You're going to hear horror stories how it damaged someone's engine, it did this, it did that. You're going to hear other things where people say that it worked perfectly, it helped diagnose the situation. It's going to be hit and miss. Now my personal experience with it is, it's a tool like anything else. If you use it correctly, you won't have any problems. Now if you use it regularly to try to get a vehicle started, you've got a problem with the vehicle you need to fix. This isn't your solution. But for me, from time to time, if I want to isolate an issue fairly quickly, I can actually spray a little bit of starter fluid into the throttle body and see if the engine runs for more than a couple seconds. That can definitely tell me if I've got a fuel system. Now remember, Chrysler vehicles do not use mass airflow sensors, so we don't have to worry about damaging anything by spraying it through the air inlet. We're just going straight into the throttle body, so it shouldn't be an issue. Like I said, 1 or 2 squirts is all I'm going to be using. But I know right now a lot of you are screaming at the top of your lungs, you're beating on your keyboards or your phones saying don't use this. Everybody's got an opinion about it. Like I said, if you use it sparingly, you won't have a problem. So just open your throttle body, give a couple of good squirts. I try to spin it over and see if it starts. So as you saw, spraying the starter fluid had no effect. The engine did not start and run. But we're still going to go through the process of checking the fuel system. That was just one of the things that you asked about, so I wanted to go ahead and include it in there. So at this point, we're going to find the fuel line. I'm going to show you a gauge set that we can use, and we're going to start with checking fuel pressure. Now, in order to check fuel pressure, we got to tie into the fuel system somewhere. On older vehicles, there used to be a Schrader valve somewhere, typically on the fuel rail. On the PT, it was on the back side, close to where the transmission was. This vehicle doesn't have one. What happened over the years was Chrysler, in their grand wisdom, learned that they could possibly save $1 or $2 by eliminating the Schrader valve. So of course, as a mechanic, that made it a little bit harder for us to diagnose fuel pressure issues. So what we've got to do now is we've got to go to somewhere in the fuel line, find a quick disconnect or something we can unthread, and we got to place a T somewhere that we can install our gauge. Now in this vehicle, the fuel line's right here. We've got a quick connect right here on the firewall, and we've got one down here on the fuel rail. The problem with the one on the fuel rail is it's hard to get to. We've got the thermostat housing right here, the upper intake. It's kind of hard to get to the release. But the one on the firewall, it's a lot easier. So looking at the firewall, if you find the location of the AC accumulator, look right here, you'll see the quick connect. You can also see the fuel line coming up right here. That's what we're going to be releasing and installing our T on. So let me go ahead and show you a fuel pressure kit that we're going to be using. Now you know, if you've been following this channel long enough, that it wouldn't be a Motorcity Mechanic video if I didn't show another OTC kit. Now this is their professional fuel injection service kit. This has just about every fitting you can think of for tying into the fuel system on just about every make and model vehicle out there today for checking fuel pressure. The kit number is 6550 Pro. Once you open it up, you can see a lot of those fittings that I just mentioned. If you're working at an independent shop, you may come across some of these you need. If you're like specialized like Chrysler like me, majority of these you'll never touch. Obviously we've got our gauge right here with quick connect. If we lift up the tray, we've got all the related hoses that we need to use. With the Chrysler vehicles, you're mainly going to be dealing with these T's right here. So what we need to do is find out which one fits the PT and find the appropriate hose and hook up the gauge. So now that we've got the T installed, the line and the gauge, we're ready to spin the engine over and monitor the fuel pressure. Now the specs for this is 58 psi plus or minus 5. So looking at the gauge, you can see that we're reading 55 psi, so we're within the range for pressure. Now the next thing we're going to check is the flow. Now the next thing we're going to be checking is the amount of fuel that the pump can put out over a period of time. That's what they call the flow test. What we're going to be doing is capturing fuel into a container such as this mason jar, and we're going to be energizing the fuel pump for 20 seconds. If you've got an external relay, you can jump the terminals. If you don't, and you've got a scanner that's capable of running the flow test, all you'd have to do is select that and it turns it on for 20 seconds. If not, you're going to have to supply voltage to the pump for that period of time. What I've done is I've tied in the same place that I hooked the gauge up. And instead of the gauge this time, I've got a fitting out of that kit that's open on one end. I'm inserting it into the mason jar. Next thing I got to do is I got to time it and I got to energize it for 20 seconds. So now we're ready to run the test. And there we have it. Now that we've got our sample, we need to go ahead and measure it. Now the specs for that flow test is 417 milliliters. And as you can see, we've got around 450. So both the fuel pressure test and the flow test passed. When running that flow test, we were able to collect a sample of fuel from the PT Cruiser. That sample is going to lead into our next topic, which is fuel quality. Now, fuel quality, you're going to be limited on what you can check. We don't have any test equipment or test strips that we can take samples of to see if the fuel is good or bad. So we're going to have to rely on a couple things. Non-scientific things at that, which is smell, visually looking at it, and also the color. Now, as far as looking to see if anything's floating in there or if we've got any kind of contamination, what you want to do is sit your sample somewhere where it's not going to be moved for a while and watch it over time. See if there's a visual separation, a line forming, maybe a discoloration. Maybe you got brown on here and you've got the yellow on the bottom. That's a definite sign of contamination. Also look to see if you visually see anything floating in there. Now, as far as smell, bad fuel has an obvious distinct smell, but it has to be on that severe end. Fuel starting to go bad is still hit and miss. You can get a smell from a known good sample and it might smell different from gas station to gas station. So smell is not really a scientific method and not very accurate at all. Now, as far as color, as you can see, the sample on the right from the PT and the sample from the gas station on the left both have a yellow tint. The one on the right has a slightly more yellow tint. But once again, it's hard to rely on that because if you go to another gas station, this might be the sample you get. So smell and color are kind of hit and miss. Obviously, looking for contamination is what you want. Now with the PT Cruiser, luckily the fuel tank's almost on empty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue running the flow test, but the difference is I'm going to put the end of the hose into a larger container. I'm just going to drain the tank and I'm going to fill it up with about 5 gallons of fresh fuel that I got. So that way we eliminate the guesswork on that. So the next step, we're testing the injectors to make sure that they're being triggered, and we're also possibly going to be checking for a spray pattern. Now with the intake removed, we've now got access to the injectors so we can get to the connectors so we can make sure that we're getting power and ground and that they're being triggered. So we'll pull back on the upper radiator hose. I got a little more access. Get to the connector, disconnect each one, pull them off, and just go on down the line. So in order to test the injectors, what we're going to be using is what they call a Noid light. Now this is a kit you can get at any one of your local auto parts stores. They're around 20 bucks, and inside they get all kinds of different testers that you plug in that will light up. It really depends on the make and model of the vehicle that you're working on. All we need to do is find which one matches our connector and plug it in. Now one thing I want to point out before we go using that Noid light is the fact that it's not going to be super bright. It's not like a headlight bulb coming on and off. You got to look very close at it and you can see the element lighting up. And a lot of that is all the lighting that we've got throughout the shop that we're using for filming. It kind of bleaches everything out. So nonetheless, watch that filament, you'll see it light up and you'll know that we've got a good pulse coming from the PCM. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the connector for injector number 1, slide a Noid light on, make sure it's fully seated, and we're going to spin the engine over and see if we can actually see the light blinking. So as you saw, we had a blinking light for the injector number 1, so we know that the PCM is triggering it properly. So what we'll do next is we'll unplug it and we'll go down to cylinders number 2, 3, and 4, and that way we can make sure that all 4 cylinders are working properly as far as the injectors. So we verified that the PCM is triggering each one of the injectors. Now the next thing we might want to check is, do we have a stuck open injector or a stuck closed injector? The only way to really tell that is to see if you actually got a spray pattern coming out. So what I've done here is I've unbolted the fuel rail from the intake. I've got it suspended by 2 bungee cords and I've got a paper towel underneath. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to crank the engine. And I want you to observe each one of the injectors to make sure you see a pattern coming out and see if you get a wet spot on the paper towel. So as you saw, as I was cranking the engine over and over, we had wet spots forming below each one of the injectors. Looking at them now, we got a nice uniform pattern. No injector was stuck open, no injector was stuck closed. So obviously there's no issues there. So at this point, we might not know what's going on, but we certainly have eliminated a lot of things. We already know it's not an ignition problem. We know that it's not a compression problem. We know it's not a fuel related problem. So that's going to leave us with checking the exhaust and the timing of the engine. I've still got my gut instinct on what I think it is, but at this point, I'm not going to say it until we dive further into it. And all that's going to be in the next video. So if you like this video, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up on YouTube. Don't forget you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you got any comments or suggestions about anything you saw in today's video, or anything Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, or Ram related, you can always email me at david@motorcitymechanic.com. Always, if you'd like to shop on Amazon, there is a link in the description below this video, and any purchases that you make will help support this channel. Thanks again, everybody, for watching.